Happy Monday, everybody. Episode 206 coming at you. Thank you for everybody who tuned in last week to the episode where we talked about Jacob's ladders and what they are. We had another question come in regarding to that topic about what happens if you shorten the ladder straps. And funny enough, my dad brought me this in today that he came across when he was cleaning out. They're getting ready to move, and so there's a little picture in here that does a really good job of diagramming how the roll center moves when you go to a shorter ladder or move the pickup point of one or the other. And as I talked last week, if you made a simple cardboard cutout and moved up and down, you would see how the roll center is on an arc and how changing any of the pieces, whether it's the length of the ladder strap, the length of the ladder, where they pick up on the chassis, how it changes that arc. So like going to a shorter ladder from a 14-inch ladder to a 13.5, that will tighten the race car up. Because it's moving the roll center, and then the way that arc is, it changes the roll center much quicker. So another question that came in was the difference between a 6 and 7-inch length shock and when you should use one or the other. We actually did a Monday morning quarterback. Jack will put a link in the description where we talk about shock lengths and making sure you have the right length shocks on your car and how to go about measuring that. So I won't dive too deep into that. You can watch that where we went through all that. A lot of the times the length of the shock you're going to run is dictated by the chassis builder, or sometimes combination of chassis builder and front axle builder. But we talk about that in that video and how to measure your shock and make sure that you're optimizing both down travel and up travel. So thank you for those questions. So tonight's topic, we are going to talk about bird cages, what they are, what they're used for, and how we set those things up. So without further ado, we'll cut away to that shop video and come right back. How's it going, everybody? Today we're going to talk about the bird cage and what the primary function of the bird cage is. Interesting side note, as I was doing some extra research for this, I wanted to know why it's called a bird cage, because that's kind of an odd name for a bearing carrier. But it's because when they first started building these things and they were like two pieces of steel with a bearing in them, it apparently looked like a bird cage that a bird would live in. So that's why they called it a bird cage. But anyway, the primary function of the bird cage is to hold your radius rod and your torsion arm in position, which affects the movement of the rear axle and relative to the chassis during cornering, okay? The majority of midget and sprint cars and a good portion of micros utilize what we call a Z-link design. And what that means is the torsion arm and the radius rod connected to the bird cage form a Z. And in a Z-link design, if the top rod and the bottom arm are positioned the exact same amount from the center line of the bird cage, and they're identical length, as the car moves through travel, which is what we would call dynamic travel on the racetrack, there will be no rear steer gained or lost. So your rear steer will stay identical. Now you'll notice that rear top radius rod is substantially longer than the rear arm. Why is that? We want rear steer, okay? As the car travels through its range of motion on the racetrack, if we have rear steer, the right rear axle will lead the left rear, which will tighten the race car up. How much it leads the axle forward is totally dependent on the geometry of these bars. So the length and then the angle at which they're at. Which also leads us to an important part of when you're doing your initial setup, which is your bird cage angle. So typically, if you're going to set your bird cage angle, you want the car on what we would call ride height blocks. So not setup blocks, which you'd put underneath the axle to set the preload on your torsion bars and set your cross weights and corner weights, but a block that is going to be very similar in height to how far that axle is away from the chassis when the car is sitting at ride height with the driver in it as you're ready to race. So once you did, a lot of times your chassis manufacturer will tell you what height block they want the car at to square the rear end. And on those blocks is when you'd want to set your birdcage angle. So all you'll need is a simple angle finder. You'll always want to zero it on the bottom rail of the chassis. And then on a flat surface on the birdcage, you're going to set the birdcage angle. And you'll do that by adjusting this top radius rod. Typically, guys are going to run that birdcage either what we would call square, which is 90 degrees, or they will roll it up to 2 degrees forward, depending on what they're trying to do. You really never want the birdcage rocked back. You don't want this radius rod picking up farther back. So you're going to be 90 degrees or rolled forward. So that's kind of all the functions of a birdcage, why it's called a birdcage, and hope you enjoyed tonight's topic. So hope you guys got something out of that. Again, an interesting topic. I dove down a rabbit hole to find out why they called them bird cages when I was doing a little bit of research on these things. And you know, really our whole goal with these videos is trying to help everybody from the average racer, rookie racer on up, and help them have a better understanding of different components. So these seem to be the videos you guys are liking to see. If you have topics or ideas, let us know. We're filming these things and we're committed to bringing them to you every week. So again, this is the Steve Smith Autosports book. A lot of the real sought after one is the sprint car one. I've seen some on eBay for like $1,000. There was one on Amazon for $699 because they went out of print like 25, 30 years ago. So the ones that are still around are crazy expensive. So my dad didn't hit the honey hole. I think the mini sprint one wasn't as circulated. I mean, you can still find a go-kart one that they did online, but they were good books. A lot of the stuff has changed. I was thumbing through this and they suggest using PVC pipe for axle spacers. I wouldn't really recommend that today. And the shocks they described as low pressure, a twin tube shock they described as a low pressure shock, and a monotube was a high pressure shock. So some of the stuff has changed, but squaring and geometries and measuring Caster and Ackerman and all that stuff is still really similar. So there's some good nuggets in these books. But anyhow, greatly appreciate you guys tuning in. Hope you all have a fantastic week. We're headed to the Pete Fraser this week at Port City. Hopefully we'll see some of you guys there, and good luck wherever you're racing this weekend.